the torches along the grand ballroom of the Kaiserliche Hofburg Palace cast their amber light upon the ornate gold leaf that adorned the ceiling, creating an ethereal glow that bathed the aristocratic assembly below. Vienna, in the winter of 1897, was at the height of its splendor during Emperor Franz Joseph's reign. The Austro-Hungarian Empire still maintained its facade of glory, though beneath the surface, tension simmered like embers awaiting a breeze. Lieutenant Zachary Ziegler stood at attention, his back pressed against the marble wall, his white-gloved hands clasped firmly behind him. At 28, he had risen through the ranks of the Imperial Guard with remarkable speed, earning his position within the elite corps that protected the Habsburg monarchy. His uniform, midnight blue adorned with silver braiding, had been meticulously pressed for this evening's grand ball celebrating the Empress's birthday. From his post, Zachary could observe the entire proceedings without drawing attention. The orchestra played Strauss waltzes that floated through the air like perfume, and nobles in their finery twirled across the polished floor with practiced grace. Yet despite the kaleidoscope of color and movement before him, his eyes were inexorably drawn to a single figure. Theresa Volkov stood apart from the clusters of laughing courtiers, her gown of pale blue silk catching the light as she moved. Unlike the Austrian noble women with their elaborate curls and rouged cheeks, her dark hair was simply styled, revealing the clean lines of her face. The daughter of a Russian diplomat and an Austrian countess, she inhabited a curious middle ground in court, respected for her lineage yet viewed with the subtle suspicion reserved for those with foreign blood. The orchestra began a new piece, the familiar strains of the Blue Danube rising to the gilded ceiling. Couples formed on the dance floor, men bowing, women curtsying before joining hands. Zachary watched as several gentlemen approached Theresa, only to be politely declined with a graceful inclination of her head. When the floor had filled and the music swelled to its heights, she moved to an open space near the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. There, believing herself unobserved behind a marble column, she began to dance. Alone. Zachary felt his throat tighten. Her movements were not the rigid, prescribed steps of Viennese court dance but something more fluid, more honest. She danced as though in conversation with the music itself, her arms rising and falling like the gentle breath of someone in peaceful slumber. In that moment, seeing her vulnerability laid bare in a room where appearances were currency, Zachary made a silent vow. He would know her, not as the mysterious half-Russian daughter of diplomacy, but as the woman who danced alone when she thought no one was watching. The duties of an Imperial Guard, however, allowed for no such romantic notions. Zachary was bound by his oath to the emperor, by the rigid hierarchies that governed every aspect of court life. He was a soldier of common birth, raised to his position through merit rather than bloodline. She was the daughter of nobility, her future predetermined by alliances and advantages. Winter melted into spring, and Zachary's duties rotated through the palace. Sometimes weeks passed when he caught only glimpses of her, crossing the Heldenplatz with her maid, attending mass in the imperial chapel, or sitting with a book in the palace library. Yet each sighting seemed to him like a rare celestial event, memorable in its brevity. It was during his rotation guarding the imperial gardens that fate intervened. April had brought an explosion of blossoms, and the formal pathways had become canopies of pink and white petals. Zachary stood at his post near the eastern gate when a familiar figure appeared on the gravel path. Theresa walked slowly, pausing occasionally to examine a particularly beautiful arrangement or to breathe in the fragrance of the blooms. She wore a simple walking dress of lavender, her hair partially covered by a matching bonnet. When she drew near his post, Zachary fixed his gaze forward as protocol demanded. A sudden gust of wind swept through the garden, sending petals swirling through the air. The same breeze caught Theresa's bonnet, lifting it from her head and carrying it directly toward Zachary's post. Without thinking, he stepped forward and captured it mid-flight. "Oh," she exclaimed, hurrying toward him. "How fortunate." "Thank you, Lieutenant." Zachary felt a flush creep up his neck at her use of his rank. "It's my duty to be of service, Lady Volkov," he replied, extending the bonnet toward her. Her eyes, a startling shade of amber he had never been close enough to notice, widened slightly. "You know my name." He faltered, then recovered. "It is part of my duty to recognize the regular visitors to the palace." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. And do you know the names of all the court ladies, Lieutenant? Ziegler, he supplied. Zachary Ziegler. And no, my lady, I confess I do not. She accepted the bonnet, her fingers briefly brushing against his gloved hand. Then I am honored by your particular attention, Lieutenant Ziegler. Before he could respond, she had tied the bonnet back in place and continued on her path, though not before glancing back at him once more. That evening, as Zachary completed his duty roster in the guardhouse, a palace page delivered a sealed note. Inside was a simple message written in an elegant hand, *, my mother's salon hosts a small musical recital tomorrow at 4. The Hungarian violinist Jen Hubey will perform. Should your duties permit, you might find the garden entrance less observed than the main door. *T.V. Zachary read the note 3 times before burning it in the guardhouse candle. Such an invitation crossed boundaries that could end his military career, or worse. Yet the thought of declining never entered his mind. The following afternoon, having exchanged his duty shift with a fellow guard, Zachary arrived at the garden entrance to the East Wing apartments where many of the diplomatic families resided. He had donned his civilian clothes, a respectable dark suit that he wore to Sunday services, and carried his uniform cap under his arm as tenuous proof of official business should he be questioned. A young maid opened the door at his light knock, glancing at him with uncertainty. "I've come for the recital," he said quietly. "At Lady Volkov's invitation." The maid nodded and led him through a narrow corridor to a salon where perhaps 20 people had gathered. The room was arranged with chairs facing a small cleared area where a dark-haired man was tuning a violin. Theresa stood near a window in animated conversation with an elderly gentleman, but her eyes immediately found Zachary as he entered. She excused herself and crossed to him, maintaining a proper distance. "Lieutenant, how pleased I am that you could attend. You enjoy music, I hope." "Very much," he replied, though in truth, his experience with chamber music was limited to what he had overheard during palace functions. "Allow me to introduce you to my father," she said, guiding him toward the elderly man she had been speaking with. Dmitry Volkov was a distinguished diplomat who had served the Russian interests in Vienna for nearly 2 decades. His face bore the deep lines of a man who had navigated treacherous political waters, yet his eyes remained sharp and assessing. "Father, this is Lieutenant Ziegler of the Imperial Guard. He was kind enough to rescue my bonnet yesterday in the gardens." The older man extended his hand. "Any kindness to my daughter is appreciated, Lieutenant. You are a music enthusiast." "I appreciate beauty in all its forms, sir," Zachary replied carefully. Something in his answer seemed to satisfy the diplomat, who nodded thoughtfully. "Then you have come to the right place." Hubey studied under Liszt himself. The recital began, and Zachary found himself seated beside Theresa. As the violinist drew his bow across the strings, producing notes of such purity that they seemed to pierce through to the soul, he was acutely aware of her presence, the slight rise and fall of her breathing, the faint scent of jasmine that emanated from her, the way her hands rested in her lap, occasionally tensing during particularly moving passages. When the performance concluded and the small gathering dispersed, Theresa walked with Zachary to the garden door. "Did you truly enjoy it?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "It was..." He searched for words. "It made me think of you dancing." Her eyes widened. "Dancing? At the winter ball, when you thought no one was watching? You danced alone to the Blue Danube." A flush spread across her cheeks. "You saw that?" "It was the most honest moment in a room full of pretense," he said simply. She looked down, collecting herself. "Lieutenant Ziegler, I fear I have been too forward in inviting you here. My position allows me certain liberties that yours does not. I would not wish to cause you difficulty." "The difficulty would be in pretending I had not seen you," he replied. The maid appeared in the doorway, a subtle reminder that their conversation could not continue. "Perhaps," Theresa said quietly, "you might enjoy walking in the Volksgarten tomorrow? The roses are particularly beautiful at midday." With that elliptical suggestion, they parted. The following weeks established a delicate pattern. They would meet as if by coincidence in public spaces, gardens, museums, the occasional concert. Their conversations, begun hesitantly, grew increasingly open. She spoke of her childhood divided between St. Petersburg and Vienna, of feeling perpetually caught between two worlds. He shared stories of growing up as the son of a clockmaker in Salzburg, of his decision to join the army after his father's death had left the family workshop in debt. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one afternoon as they stood before a Rembrandt at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, careful to maintain a respectable distance between them. "Leaving your father's trade?" Zachary considered the question seriously. "I sometimes miss the precision of it, knowing that every gear and spring has its perfect place. But the army gave me purpose when I needed it most." "And now? What gives you purpose now?" Her eyes remained fixed on the painting, but her question reached deeper. "Lately," he said carefully, "I find myself measuring time differently." She turned to him then. "How so?" "By moments of truth rather than by the passing of hours." A small group of Italian tourists approached the painting, and Theresa moved away, ending their conversation. Yet Zachary felt something had shifted between them, a door had been opened that could not be easily closed again. June brought the preparation for the Emperor's summer journey to Bad Ischl, and Zachary learned he would be among the Imperial Guard contingent accompanying the court. The night before his departure, he received another note delivered by a street urchin as he left the guardhouse. Asterisk the Belvedere Gardens at sunset. Lower Pavilion. Asterisk. Asterisk, T. Asterisk he found her waiting in the shadow of an ornate stone structure, the setting sun casting long shadows across the formal gardens. She wore a simple dress of cream-colored muslin, her dark hair partially covered by a light shawl. "You're leaving tomorrow," she said without preamble. "Yes. For 6 weeks, perhaps longer if the Emperor extends his stay." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "I have something for you." From a small reticule, she withdrew a slender volume bound in blue leather. Poetry by Pushkin. My mother's copy, with her translations in the margins. She was Austrian, like you. Zachary accepted the book, aware of the significance of such a personal gift. "Theresa, read it," she interrupted. "When you're in Bad Ischl. It may help you understand." "Understand what?" She looked away, toward the palace that loomed behind them. "Why I dance alone?" Before he could respond, she continued, "My father has been recalled to St. Petersburg. We leave Vienna in September." The news struck Zachary like a physical blow. "Permanently. He speaks of retirement, of returning to our estate outside Moscow." She met his gaze directly. "I have no choice in the matter." "There are always choices," he said, the words emerging before he could consider their implications. "Are there?" A sad smile played at her lips. "Even for a half-Russian diplomat's daughter and an Imperial Guard lieutenant." The question hung between them, unanswerable in the fading light. "I should go," she said finally. "Be well in Bad Ischl, Zachary." It was the first time she had used his given name, and it affected him more deeply than he could have anticipated. Acting on impulse, he reached for her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers with a reverence that transcended the mere courtly gesture. "Wait for me to return," he said, his voice low. "Please." She withdrew her hand slowly, her expression unreadable. 6 weeks is a long time in Vienna. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Zachary standing in the growing darkness, clutching a book of Russian poetry and fighting the urge to follow her. Bad Ischl, with its alpine beauty and rarefied air, was a prison to Zachary. Though his duties kept him occupied, standing guard at the Emperor's hunting lodge, escorting members of the imperial family on their walks through the picturesque town, his thoughts remained in Vienna. Each night, by lamplight in the guardsmen's quarters, he read from Theresa's book of Pushkin, tracing the delicate handwriting in the margins that translated the Russian poet's words into German. One poem in particular spoke to him, asterisk I loved you, and perhaps I love you still asterisk. Asterisk the flame, perhaps, is not extinguished, yet asterisk. Asterisk it burns so quietly within my soul asterisk. Asterisk no longer should you feel disturbed by it. Asterisk the translation in the margin, written in faded ink by Theresa's mother, added, asterisk love that asks for nothing in return brings its own peace. Asterisk as July turned to August and his return to Vienna approached, Zachary formulated a plan that seemed equal parts madness and necessity. He requested a private audience with Colonel Hauer, the commander of the Imperial Guard, a man known for his rigid adherence to protocol but also for his fairness. Lieutenant Ziegler, the colonel said when Zachary was admitted to his office in the hunting lodge, this is most unusual. What matter is so urgent it requires a private audience? Zachary stood at attention, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. Sir, I wish to submit my resignation from the Imperial Guard, effective upon our return to Vienna. Colonel Hauer's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. Resignation? You've been identified for promotion, Ziegler. Your record is exemplary. I am honored by that recognition, sir, but personal circumstances necessitate my departure. The colonel studied him for a long moment. Sit down, Lieutenant. When Zachary had complied, he continued, is this about the Volkov girl? Zachary felt the blood drain from his face. So, you think the Imperial Guard doesn't notice when one of its officers begins meeting a diplomat's daughter in public gardens? The colonel's tone was not accusatory but measured. Particularly a Russian diplomat in these uncertain times. Sir, I assure you, there has been no impropriety. Colonel Hauer held up a hand. I didn't suggest there had been. But I know the look of a man who has made a decision that will alter the course of his life. He leaned back in his chair. What do you plan to do if I accept your resignation? Return to my father's trade, sir. Clockmaking. And this decision, it's connected to the Volkov family's imminent departure from Vienna. Zachary met his commander's gaze directly. Yes, sir. The colonel sighed heavily. Love has been the downfall of empires, Ziegler. And yet... He paused, looking past Zachary to a small framed photograph on his desk. And yet without it, what are we protecting? He straightened in his chair. Your resignation is accepted, effective upon our return to Vienna. I will provide you with a letter of commendation for your service. Thank you, sir. Ziegler, the colonel added as Zachary rose to leave, whatever you're planning, be certain. The world is changing faster than any of us can comprehend. The old empires won't survive the new century in their current form. I understand, sir. No, Colonel Hauer said quietly, I don't think you do. But perhaps that's for the best. The imperial retinue returned to Vienna in late August to find the city sweltering under an unusual heat wave. As promised, Colonel Hauer processed Zachary's resignation with efficiency, and within a week, he had exchanged his uniform for the simple clothes of a civilian. Using the modest savings from his military service, he secured a small workshop near the Nestroyplatz and began the process of establishing himself as a clockmaker. Each day, he awaited word from Theresa, but none came. His inquiries about the Volkov family elicited only the information that they were indeed preparing to depart for Russia in mid-September. As the days passed without contact, doubt began to creep into his resolve. Then, on a sultry evening as he was closing his workshop, a familiar street urchin appeared with a folded note, asterisk the Spanish riding school, tomorrow at dawn. The guards will allow you entry if you mention Master Dietrich's name. Asterisk. Asterisk, T. Asterisk dawn found Zachary at the imposing entrance to the Spanish riding school, its baroque architecture softened by the early morning light. A sleepy guard admitted him after he mentioned the name from the note, directing him to the main arena. The vast space was empty save for a single figure standing in the center of the sandy ring. Theresa wore a simple riding habit of deep green, her hair braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. As he approached, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall, she turned to face him. You came, she said, her voice carrying in the empty space. Did you doubt I would? She shook her head. No. But I doubted myself, whether I had the right to ask. Zachary closed the distance between them, stopping an arm's length away. I've left the Imperial Guard. Her eyes widened. Zachary, no, yes, he insisted. I've reopened my father's workshop. Already I have commissions for repairs from several prominent families. But your career, your future, my future, he interrupted gently, was decided the night I watched you dance alone. Everything since has merely been finding my way back to that moment of certainty. Tears welled in her amber eyes. We leave for Russia in 10 days. I know. He took a deep breath. And I'm asking you not to go. What? She whispered. Marry me, he said simply. Stay in Vienna. Or if you must go to Russia, let me follow you there. I can make clocks in Moscow as easily as in Vienna. She shook her head, tears now flowing freely. You don't understand. My father, he's arranged a marriage for me in St. Petersburg. To the son of a count who serves the Tsar. The word struck Zachary like physical blows, yet he stood his ground. Do you love this count, son? I've never met him. Then don't go. He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. Your mother chose love once, didn't she? When she married a Russian diplomat instead of an Austrian nobleman. Theresa looked down at their joined hands. And she was never fully accepted in either world because of it. Perhaps acceptance is less valuable than authenticity, Zachary suggested. Your mother's notes in Pushkin's poems, they speak of a woman who found joy despite standing apart. A small smile curved Theresa's lips. You actually read the book? Every word. Twice. He squeezed her hand gently. I have nothing to offer but my heart and my hands, Theresa. But both are yours if you'll have them. She looked up at him, her expression shifting from sorrow to something more complex, fear mingled with hope. Even if I say yes, my father would never permit it. Then we'll find another way. He stepped closer, emboldened by the fact that she hadn't refused him outright. Do you remember what you asked me in the museum? What gives me purpose now? She nodded. It's you, Theresa. Not the idea of you, or what you represent, but you as you truly are. The woman who dances alone when she thinks no one is watching. The woman who reads Russian poetry in secret gardens. The woman brave enough to reach across boundaries that have stood for centuries. For a long moment, she was silent, her eyes searching his face as though memorizing every feature. Then, with a deep breath, she straightened her posture, decision evident in the set of her shoulders. Meet me at the North Station on Thursday at midnight, she said, her voice steady despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. Bring only what you need. I'll do the same. Thursday? But that's 5 days from now, yes. Her eyes held a determination he had never seen before. Time enough to settle your affairs and for me to gather what's mine by right from my mother's estate. And your father? A shadow crossed her face. I'll leave him a letter. He may never forgive me, but perhaps someday he'll understand. Zachary felt a mixture of elation and disbelief. Where will we go? Switzerland first, she said with the precision of someone who had considered this possibility before. Then perhaps America. Somewhere new, where what matters is what we build together, not who our ancestors were. He drew her into his arms then, protocol and propriety forgotten in the empty splendor of the Imperial riding school. She came willingly, her body fitting against his as though designed for that very purpose. I've loved you since I saw you dance, he whispered against her hair. She looked up at him, a smile breaking through her tears. And I've loved you since you told me why. The night air at the Nordbahnhof carried the first hint of autumn's approach. Zachary stood in the shadows near the last platform, a single valise at his feet containing his tools, a change of clothes, and the blue leather book of Pushkin's poetry. Every few minutes, he checked his pocket watch, a fine piece he had restored himself, its steady ticking a counterpoint to his racing pulse. Midnight approached, then passed. The final train of the night, bound for Zurich, would depart in 20 minutes. Doubt began to gnaw at him. Perhaps her father had discovered their plan. Perhaps she had reconsidered. The station was nearly deserted, save for a few late travelers and railway workers. Zachary strained his eyes toward every entrance, watching for her familiar silhouette. At 10 minutes before departure, he heard a commotion near the main doors, raised voices, a woman's protest. His heart sank as he recognized Dmitry Volkov's commanding tone, followed by the unmistakable sound of military boots on marble. Zachary pressed deeper into the shadows, calculating his options. If Volkov had brought Imperial officers, his former status would offer no protection. Yet he couldn't leave without knowing what had happened to Theresa. The voices grew closer, moving toward his platform. He shifted his position to see better while remaining concealed. Dmitry Volkov strode down the platform, his silver hair gleaming under the gas lamps, flanked by two men in the uniform of the diplomatic corps. Behind them, to Zachary's shock, walked Theresa, head high, unrestrained, carrying a small traveling case. "This is absurd, Theresa," her father was saying, his accent more pronounced in his agitation. "Running away like a character in one of your novels. Think of the scandal, the damage to our position." "I've thought of nothing else for weeks, father," she replied, her voice steady. "My decision is made." They stopped mere yards from where Zachary stood, hidden, close enough that he could see the stubborn set of Theresa's jaw, so like her father's. "And this clockmaker," Volkov continued, practically spitting the word, "what can he offer you compared to Count Petrov's son?" "A title, estates, position at court, happiness," she interrupted. "He can offer me happiness." The old diplomat threw up his hands in exasperation. "Happiness? As if that were a currency that could buy bread or secure your future." "It secured yours," Theresa countered quietly. "When you married mother against her family's wishes. When you chose love over advantage." Volkov fell silent, the fight seeming to drain out of him in an instant. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. "That was different. Times were different." "No, father. The times merely provided an excuse for courage." She set down her case and took his hands in hers. "You taught me to value truth above convenience. This is my truth." The old man looked down at their joined hands, then up at his daughter's face. Something in his expression shifted, a grudging recognition replacing his anger. "He will have to prove himself worthy," he said finally. "He already has." She smiled, glancing toward the shadows where Zachary stood. "You can come out now," she called softly. "My father wishes to meet you properly." Heart pounding, Zachary stepped into the light, valise in hand. He approached the small group and bowed formally to the diplomat. "Sir," he said simply. Volkov's assessing gaze took in every detail of Zachary's appearance, from his respectable but modest suit to the well-worn leather of his valise. "So you're the clockmaker who stole my daughter's heart?" "With respect, sir, I merely recognized its true rhythm." A surprised bark of laughter escaped the old diplomat. "Well said." He turned to Theresa. "Your mother would approve, I think. She always did prefer directness to diplomacy." The train whistle blew, signaling the final call for boarding. "What happens now?" Zachary asked, looking from Theresa to her father. Volkov sighed heavily. "Now, young man, you come with us to Russia." "Russia?" Theresa and Zachary spoke in unison. "Yes," the diplomat continued. "If you're determined to marry my daughter, you'll do so properly, with my blessing, at our family estate outside Moscow. After that?" He shrugged. "After that, your lives are your own. Switzerland, America, wherever you choose." Theresa embraced her father fiercely, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you, Papa." Over her shoulder, Volkov fixed Zachary with a stern gaze that softened almost imperceptibly. "My wife once told me that love that asks for nothing in return brings its own peace. See that you remember that, clockmaker." "I will, sir," Zachary promised, recognizing the words from the marginalia in Theresa's book. As the train to Zurich departed without them and plans were made for the journey east, Zachary found Theresa's hand and squeezed it gently. She turned to him, her amber eyes alight with a joy he had glimpsed only once before, when she had danced alone, unobserved, to the music that spoke to her heart. "How did you know?" she whispered. "That night at the ball, how did you know to watch me?" Zachary smiled, the answer as clear to him now as it had been on that winter evening months ago. Because even in a room full of light and color, you were the only one I could truly see. And as they walked together out of the station into the cool Vienna night, Zachary thought of the silent vow he had made while standing guard, to know her as she truly was. In finding the courage to step from the shadows and into the light of their shared future, that vow had been not just fulfilled but transcended, transformed into a promise that would span continents, outlast empires, and find its truth in the steady rhythm of two hearts beating as one.